Divorce happens. In fact, it happens to almost 50% of first marriages. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Divorce Happens, a podcast to educate, inspire, support, and yes, make you laugh through divorce and beyond so that you can start fresh on the next phase of your journey. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh.
You'll get divorced. You'll get divorced.
Getting divorced?
I'm getting a divorce.
You're getting a divorce.
Because she's getting a divorce.
So what if I get divorced?
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Divorce Happens, the show where we support you before, during, and after divorce with education, inspiration, and a little bit of laughter. Because as we know, divorce happens and then you start fresh. We're here with a friend of mine, Heather. Heather, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Olivia. I'm happy to be here. I'm Heather Sweeney. I'm a writer and author of the upcoming memoir, Camouflage, How I Emerged from the Shadows of a Military Marriage. And it's about my journey from being overshadowed by my husband's military career to rediscovering myself after divorce as a single mom approaching middle age.
And you got divorced while he was in the military or after?
Yes, while he was in the military.
Okay, we're going to have
Yes.
you come back to do an episode about that because I think that's a really important. And I have gotten some people in my divorce consults that come to me for support with military divorce, which is a totally different topic.
It is.
Yeah, so we'll have you come back for that. But in the meantime, this is one of my favorite segments. We were just saying before we began that hearing from, I like to call them divorced humans, as you go through your divorce can be so, I don't know, like just liberating to know that like other people have done this. And so I would love to know, Heather, what were the 3 things that you learned from your divorce?
Sure. I mean, there are so many, right? But I'd say the first thing is that fear of the other side of divorce is not a good reason to stay in a bad marriage. Um, I was absolutely terrified of what was going to happen on the other side of the divorce. And I just couldn't even picture. I was a stay-at-home mom. I wasn't making my own money. I didn't know where I was going to live. It was just too overwhelming. And that overwhelm completely paralyzed me. And so I stayed in this marriage for way too long. And I kept telling myself, it'll get better when, dot, dot, dot. It'll get better when. And then it took a really good therapist for me to kind of do the baby steps of realizing, oh, these are going to be really hard changes, but they're going to be so much easier and more beneficial than being in this marriage where I'm absolutely miserable. So it was my second marriage therapist. We had gone to couples counseling in and out for about a year. We saw 3 different counselors, but because he was in the military, he was gone a lot. And just, I don't think he even made it to half of the sessions. And so I went by myself and just kind of talked everything out. And so one day the therapist said, well, why are you still in this marriage? There seems to be no connection. You don't seem to have a lot of love there anymore. Why are you still there? And I just kind of blurted it out and said, I am terrified of the other side of divorce. I'm so fearful of change. And he said, okay, let's break it down. What are you scared of? Where am I going to live? My finances, things like that. And once I verbalized it, and once he broke it down and step by step kind of got it out of my own head, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm a military spouse. I know how to move. I can move. I can find a place to live. Being a single parent, I'm alone a lot. I'm parenting by myself all the time anyway. And so these things just became so much more realistic, and everything that I was scared of and had paralyzed me into staying in the marriage became doable. And once they became doable, I'm like, I can do this, and I'm out, and I'm going to be so much happier.
Yeah, because you get stuck, right? You're so stuck in that fear mindset. But I also want to validate, like, where you were coming from. It is almost impossible to get yourself out. And so that's what, I know your book is about that. And we'll have you come back to talk more in detail about that. Because I know there's a lot of women, especially, who will listen to this and go, how, Heather, how did you do this, right? So we'll have Heather come back on to give us the how. Okay, so what's the second thing you learned from your divorce?
The second thing is, don't compare your divorce to other people's divorces, because everyone's process is different. I'll give an example. I tell this story a lot because it always stuck with me. I was at the very beginning stages. I'm not even quite sure we were separated yet, and I had a friend who just started her process of divorce, and she came over. We were chit chatting one day, and she said, "Do you plan on going back to your maiden name?" And I said, "Yeah, like for sure." And I said, "Are you?" And she goes, "Oh no, I would never do that to my kids. There's too much change going on for them right now. I could never do that to them." And I saw that, oh my gosh, like and she wasn't trying to shame me. She wasn't saying
Right.
that in any way. She was going through her own stuff.
Yeah.
And, but it really made me feel so guilty for weeks and months. But to me, it was extremely important to go back to my maiden name. And for her, it was extremely important for her to keep her married name. And I had to come to terms with the fact that, okay, some people are going to judge me. I have a different last name than my kids. And honestly, they're 17 and 21 right now. They don't care.
Mm-mm.
But what was right for her wasn't necessarily right for me, and vice versa. And so you have to make these big decisions. It was a big decision, but you have to make your decisions based on everything in your circumstances and not somebody else's. Same thing about moving out of the house. I ended up being the one moving out, and I moved the kids into an apartment. I'd never lived alone before. And people said all the time, well, your ex is in the military. He's gone all the time. You're going to have the kids most of the time. Why didn't you stay in the marital home? And for me, it was just the right decision. I needed to get out of the house. It was filled with ghosts. Memories kind of
Yeah.
were on seeped into every wall. And
Mhm.
fresh start, right? I
Yeah.
needed a fresh start in a new place. Um, and for some people, especially women, that's not a viable option and it's not the right decision for them. But for me, it was. And so I just couldn't compare myself to what other women were doing. Just had to do my own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell a lot of people that, like, especially when you talk to your lawyer, you don't want to go call your lawyer and be like, well, my neighbor said, right? Like, that's just not, how divorce works. I've talked to, and I'm sure you have too, hundreds of people at this point who have gone through divorce. I've never heard the same story twice, right? So, and you don't know the minutia of people's lives, right? Who's on the mortgage, who's on the deed, blah, blah, blah. No, I love that. Okay, what was the what was the third thing you learned from your divorce?
The third thing is, and it's kind of the premise of my entire book, is don't lose your identity in a partner. And for me, as a military spouse, I almost couldn't help it. I don't know if you knew this, but in the military, there's a term for a spouse, and that is a dependent. So military spouses are military dependents. And honestly, I don't know a single military spouse who likes that title, because we really are dependent on our partners. I lived in Japan for 3 years. That's where my daughter was born. And the first time we started talking about divorce, we lived in Japan. I didn't have a job. We were living overseas. I had no family nearby. And just everything in my life was wrapped up in supporting my service member's career. I had to postpone my own career. We had to have babies when he was home. And there were just so many things that, I was wrapped up completely. I was no longer Heather. I was his wife. That was my full-time job. Even when I would meet new military spouses, a lot of times they'd be like, "Oh, hey, Heather, how you doing? What command is your husband in? Where's your husband stationed?" It very much was not, "What do you do for a living?"
Right.
And my identity was completely just military spouse. And so when I got divorced, and I'm living on my own and I'm thinking about dating. And I'm like, well, I don't even know who I am anymore. And I kind of put off the whole dating thing because I thought I need to work on myself. I need to rediscover my personality, what I want, what I don't want, what I want to do, who I want to be, what kind of mother I want to be. Just everything was so wrapped up in being a wife. And it was a wonderful process. It wasn't easy. I stayed in therapy, with a different therapist, but it was very much a road of discovery. Um, and I had to figure out who I was before I could move forward. And it was a great process. But, I did realize, wow, I completely lost myself in this person and who he wanted me to be and who I was supposed to be. Um, so, yeah, and don't let your partner be your only source of happiness. I felt like, oh, he's my second half and I'm not whole without him. But you have to become whole on your own. And you can't let somebody else dictate how you are happy and what you define as happiness. Because if when the marriage ends, like you are solely responsible for providing your own happiness. And so I took all of that into my next relationship and it's made it so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us quickly about your book. Is it for pre-order yet?
It is, yes.
Okay,
It's coming out October 28th of this year, and it's available for pre-order pretty much everywhere, Amazon, Barnes&
great.
and
I'll put a
Noble,
link.
Target. Great,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So what is the premise of the book, just in a couple sentences?
Yeah, it's just about, how I went from being this military spouse and my identity is completely wrapped up in my husband, and I decided to get divorced, and I went on this path of rediscovery and reinvention and figured out life as a single mom, and it's just hopefully, I think it has a positive message and
Mhm.
a happy ending, but it really, is just my journey up from getting married at 24, figuring out how to be a military spouse, and then figuring out how to not be a spouse.
I love that. Well, we'll definitely put a link in the show notes and we'll have you come back on for sure. I'm excited to read it and to
Thank
share
you.
it with our audience. Before we let you go, Heather, if anybody's listening to this and they're considering divorce or going through a divorce, which they probably are because divorce happens,
Mm.
what would be some wise words that you could leave them with today?
I would say give yourself a lot of grace. One person told me that the year after divorce would be the hardest of your life. And while that was true, it really, like, I kind of realized one day, I remember sitting on the porch of my apartment, which I fell in love with. I didn't want to move into an apartment, but I just loved it. And I'm swirling a glass of wine and I'm sitting, and about a year had gone by. And I'm like, wow, it's been a year. I'm like, I am thriving. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving and I'm loving my life after divorce. But getting to that point wasn't easy. And if you expect that, but just be easy on yourself. Don't, there might be shame, there might be guilt, there might be anger, resentment, all of those things. Let yourself feel that. Get yourself a good therapist and be kind to yourself. People always say take it day by day. And for me, that was too hard at the beginning. When we first split up, I'm like, I can't even take it day by day. I took it step by step. I took it hour by hour. I took it breath by breath. Do what you need to do to get through it because I promise the other side is awesome. So just be kind to yourself.
I love that so much. Heather,
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time. And I'm excited to share your book with the world. There's a lot of people that are going to benefit from reading this. So
I hope so. Thank
thank you
you.
for all your beautiful words always. Divorce Happens is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the only divorce registry platform for everything you need to begin again, including home items, hype team, and everything in between. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh. We're here to support you before, during, and after divorce. Head to freshstartsregistry.com for more info.